Hello! Back again from the Corona Void to YouTube or Facebook or wherever you're watching this. So this is going to be just a talk, maybe a bit of a squat form tutorial, but we're not going to go into major detail on that. What this is going to be more of a video on the way you should think around queuing and execution of lifts, and how queuing, although well-intentioned, can lead you down, lead you up the wrong tree, or lead you down the wrong path. They can misdirect you. Some queues are going to be like, holy fuck, I understand it now, I get it now, thank you lifting Jesus. Other queues are going to be like, you don't get it, and you still don't get it, and you'll never get it, because it's not right for you in the situation, depending on the lift or whatever it is. Cues are all contextual. Context is me, my body, my experience, what I'm trying to achieve, the lift I'm doing, where I am in my training cycle, everything. It's you where you are at this time as a lifter and where you're trying to go. And what's getting in your way, what's the roadblocks to you being able to achieve what you want to achieve. That's the context. Context is everything in coaching and in interaction. Without context, cues are meaningless. Programs are meaningless. None of it actually, you have to apply something in context for it to actually make sense, for it to be intelligible, for you to actually be able to be like, okay, fine. So, that aside, so we're going to use this around squat, and I'm going to redo tutorials anyway, so those will be coming at some stage. It's probably something I'm going to say I'm going to do, and then we end up fucking 5 years down the line and finally end up doing it. But I need to redo tutorials on power lifts a bit more in depth and with a bit more editing. So that's something that will bring kind of renewed thoughts and changes to what I've kind of like taught previously in a video that kind of details everything. So this applies to all lifts, especially all static lifts. We want to be three things when we lift. We want to be stable, we want to be balanced, and we want to be strong, or we want to be able to push force into the floor. The sport of weightlifting, and specifically the sport of powerlifting, is a sport of ground reaction force. The bigger the ground reaction force I can produce in the situation or the lift that I'm trying to accomplish, the better a lifter I am. Because more ground reaction force equals more weight on the barbell. Simple. That's it. Powerlifting is the sport of creating as large a ground reaction force as you can with unlimited time, within reason, in 3 lifts. That's it, right? So, to be able to produce the largest ground reaction force possible, what stability gives me, it gives me the ability to apply force through joints in a manner where the moment arms and the relative moment arms all stay consistent. That allows me to try and find a more efficient way of producing force in that given scenario. So, an example that isn't lifting, if I want to throw a ball as hard as possible, I require stability around the shoulder joint so I have an anchor here so I can produce a greater segmental velocity at the arm. And then how I produce a greater segmental velocity at the arm, which is the end point of the movement, which is going to produce the resultant velocity, the resultant vector of the ball going faster. For me to be able to do that, I need to fix things and I need to move in places. So I need to be able to move my hip, to throw my hip But I need an anchoring point. So I need an anchoring point here specifically. So there's a fulcrum between this movement and that being thrown in a ballistic manner. So I require stability in the shoulder in a throwing action to produce a greater velocity, because it allows an anchoring point for then this to move around to produce a greater rotational force. In a squat, I require stability around here. So when I stand and try and push through here, the segmental relationship between my hip, the barbell, my knee, and the ankle doesn't change. What does that mean when I say the segmental relationship doesn't change? If I do not have stability here, and I do this, then all of a sudden there is a change in segmental relationship. All of a sudden now I have a massive lever arm from my hip to the barbell. The result of which I now need to produce greater relative force. The hip now becomes more important because there is a larger moment arm for it to overcome, which means I need to produce greater force relative to all three joints involved, the ankle, the knee, and the hip. All of a sudden, the force demand around the hip becomes much greater. Therefore, it becomes a weakness, because the hip can only produce so much force with a weight in its back when you're bent over. If I am stable through here, through core, and a lesser extent through the foot, that's more balanced, we'll cover that in a second. If I am stable through here, when I stand, the length relationships stay relatively the same. They change with movement, obviously. Human movement is dynamic. Nothing is stationary in space forever. But they remain rational and relative to each other. I don't end up with a massive swing to one side, which is what happens when I lose stability. So stability through the ankle and the core and the shoulders and the squat, for example, are massively important. Now, balance. Balance, as the whole system moves together, we talk. If you read a lot of weightlifting, sports science literature, especially Soviet era literature, they talk about the biomechanical analysis of lifting. They talk about the lifter barbell system. When I lift a bar from the floor, or I put it on my back and walk out with it, or put it over my head and walk out with it, we have a shared center of mass, we have a shared center of balance, and that's on the floor. And where that center of mass and where that center of balance is in space is determined by the orientation of the barbell, the orientation of me, the mass of me, and the mass of the barbell. If the barbell has a greater mass than I do, and it is orientated forward of me, I'm going to go forward. My center of mass, my center of balance is going to go forward because the barbell is heavier than me. If the barbell significantly less than me, and so if I'm 120 kilos and the barbell is 20 kilos, if that goes forward, it's less of an issue. Yes, the center of mass, the shared center of mass, the shared center of balance will move forward, but only by so much. So if the bar goes forward of my center and it weighs 20 kilos and I weigh 120, if it's 12.5% of my body weight, and if it comes forward 10 centimeters on my center, I'm probably not going to feel it. But in the case of a squat, in the case of a deadlift, when I am lifting 2, 3, 4 times my own body mass, when it moves forward 5 or 10 centimeters, you're going to fucking feel that deviation because it is heavier than you. So balance is it's a coordination-oriented task. It requires proprioception. It requires you to feel through the movement. It requires you to be able to assess dynamically what is happening. In plain English, when I sit down, if I sit down like this and I push my weight forward, the barbell forward, I can feel it. And a more skilled lifter or someone who has a better sense of balance will go, that was a terrible strategy because I threw everything forward. I'll try sit down like this. So balance is important. Balance and stability are, you could maybe think they were the same thing, but they are different. Balance is how you orientate the barbell and yourself in space. And it is skill. It's intramuscular coordination, rate coding, etc., etc., etc. It's skill-based. It's skill-determined. The better you are at feeling, using inputs such as sight, balance, proprioception, sensations of movement, the better you are at taking in feedback from the surrounding world, from the barbell, internal feedback, from like your sense of balance, etc., and utilizing that to create a feedback loop where you're like, okay, I've done that wrong, I'm going to correct it by doing this, the better you're going to be. You're going to be more efficient at moving, and if you're more efficient, you'll be stronger, because more efficiency in movement is going to result in a greater ground reaction force, therefore stronger. And then finally, the ground reaction force. So your actual ability to push into the floor. Everything that we do in lifting should be trying to help us to produce a greater ground reaction force. And this is where we're going to get into some of the cueing. So, if we look at some cueing specifically around the squat, because we're set up for it, let's look at two, okay? Two common ones. We're going to look at chest up, and we're going to look at knees out. And we're going to see how potentially those aren't good cues. Although you're thinking chest up, knees out, obviously that's good squatting cues. Because the squat is a system. It is an execution of a skill. If we overemphasize one thing in the system and don't have a feedback loop in place, something to check it, some kind of way of correcting it, then it could just be a maladaptation. It could be just a waste of fucking time, basically. So, okay, so we keep in mind, okay, when we go through this. We want stability, we want balance, and we want strength, or we want ground reaction force. We want to put more force into the floor. So, let's look at chest up. So, if I take the barbell out, my normal brace would be like this. Here, sit, squat, stand, push into the floor, right? So that gives me a pretty good chance of being able to produce a decent ground reaction force, to be able to push, to be able to keep stability in the core with correct footwear and correct mobility, although we can get into that if you want. I'll be able to produce movement of the ankle drift, knee movement forward. That's going to allow me to kind of line up my hips and my knees and my torso in an efficient way, which produces stability around the ankle and around the core or around the trunk. If I take my time and I'm reasonably skilled, I'm going to have good coordination between knee flexion, hip flexion, ankle flexion, and then the same resulting thing when I extend. I'm going to extend with good timing, good coordination. That's going to result in a greater ground reaction force. All of these things together, plus a good focus on neural drive, pushing into the floor, staying tight through the middle, keeping my back tight, that's going to result in a better ground reaction force, okay? All good, okay? Let's say, for whatever reason, I'm built in a way where doing this, the strongest way for me to do it is like that, okay? All of a sudden, we're seeing the hips rise forward, or the hips rise first, the chest is dropping. This is wrong because I say so, chest up. Chest up creates this, which means that all of a sudden I break the linkage between my back. I break the linkage between the barbell, my hips, knees, and ankles. It's a terrible fucking strategy. If I'm going through this, and I'm strong doing this because the bar placement, my hip or my knee length, my back length. It's not necessarily something I have to correct. I can leave it the fuck alone. We don't have to correct everything. But then all of a sudden, if I'm saying chest up, and I'm doing this, I'm creating an extension at the back, so I'm trying to articulate my spine under a heavy load. I am elongating the rectus abdominals, which means I can't tense as well, which means I'm basically moving from a strong position here into a much weaker position here, and killing your ability to be stable, because it's not strong here. I can't hold a strong lever, so I'm going to collapse all in likelihood. I am, for whatever reason, changing the skill by demanding that I let someone lift their chest up or lift their torso up, or they extend the thoracic spine or extend their lumbar spine. So I reduce your stability, I reduce your coordination or your balance, more importantly, and I also completely fucking kill your ability to put force down into the floor. It doesn't matter what the fucking squat looks like. What matters is the ability for the person to do it, to repeat it, for it to be replicable. I can't really pronounce that very well. And more importantly, it's their ability to put force into the fucking floor. It's the sport. So telling someone to lift their chest up in lieu of a feedback loop, in lieu of actually understanding movement and understand what we're trying to replicate, can lead us in a real rabbit warren of bad execution and bad replication. So there's one example. Another example, knee valgus bad, knee valgus bad. Okay, knees out, ram your knees out, ram your knees out. If you have to squat the full depth, creating a lot of external rotation at the hip could be a terrible fucking, could be a terrible strategy for somebody. It's not necessarily a good strategy. I might actually want the weight of the foot inside on the big toe so I can extend better at the knee. If all of a sudden I'm doing this, then I'm creating a tension at the hip, increasing torque at the hip or tension at the hip, taking it off the knee, and that might create worse positions, it might create worse balance. And also to assume that knee valgus is bad because you say it's bad, where our understanding of knee valgus being bad comes from running and cutting sports, where I'm putting multiples of my own body weight through one leg. If a netball player cuts like this, it's bad. Because they are female, they have a larger Q angle, they are probably lack strength through the hip, the core, the quads, and that's why they're doing it. So if I'm cutting like this, falling in, statistically speaking, I'm probably more likely to get an ACL injury. It doesn't mean I'm going to get an ACL injury. Some people can produce movement like that for whatever reason, their physiology, their biomechanics. However, if I do running, cutting sports, football, netball, basketball, rugby, whatever, where I have to produce fast lateral change of direction, falling in when I do that is generally a bad strategy. If I jump like that, typically speaking, it's a bad strategy. If I squat like that, it's not necessarily a bad strategy. It depends on the context and the individual. Some people will produce more force, more vertical force doing that. Who the fuck are you to say that's wrong? It's not necessarily something that needs to be corrected for, where we have a system of skill execution and producing movement, and I've decided via dictate, as in I think this, therefore it's true that you must produce external rotation of the hip and push your knees out. Why? We need to ask why more as athletes and coaches. Why the fuck am I doing this? Is this improving the situation? If we look at it in context, if we look at things as systems. The person trying to squat, they have different femur length than me, they have a different torso length than me, they're a different height than me, they have different muscle physiology than me, they have different psychology from me. Everything's different because they are different. So we look at them as individual. and try to assume as little as possible. We're trying to make them lift more, right? That's the fucking goal, okay? I'm not trying to make every squat look the same. I don't want to do that. Because if I do that, then I'm going to make some people really good because it's going to suit them, but everyone else shit because it's not going to suit them. I'm trying to find strategies for people that work for them. That's what I'm trying to do. You can do what the fuck you want, but that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find strategies for people that work for them. Okay? So if we look at it within context, okay? So if I'm sitting down, so again, I'll use me. So for me, I find the strongest way to track my knees is like this. All right? I find I get the most pop out of the bottom, and I can push the hardest with this. If I push my knees out, push my knees out, push my knees out, then all of a sudden hit depths of fuck up, and it hurts. It hurts my back, and I can't fucking push as hard when I come up. All right? So for me, knees out's a fucking shit cue. And that's why I'm picking it, because for me it's shit. For some other people, depending on how they're built, it may be better. It may be a good thing. That's why we do cues, we try cues. Here's a strategy. Try the strategy. What did that feel like? Feedback. System. Get better. Context. Individual. Stop fucking coaching people by dictate. There's not one way to execute things. Let's be a bit smarter about what we're doing. Let's look at context. Let's use feedback. Let's individualize movement through context, feedback. Here's a strategy, try it. What's it like? That feels better. Sweet. I'm not too sure about that. Give it a chance. That feels shit. Forget about it. Okay, that's going to conclude this video. Hopefully you found it useful. Probably a bit more of a coaching philosophy video, but I think something that a lot of coaches for sure could do very well taking it on board. There isn't one way to do things, and your way is probably not the best way, even though you think it is. Dunning-Kruger effect. 80% of men are above average drivers. The math don't work. It don't work. Chances are you're not above average. You're probably average or below average or slightly above average. As much as you might want to think you are, you're probably not. Big brain time. All right, that's going to do. Thank you very much for watching. Catch you in the next one. Goodbye.